Cities are our future. By the year 2050, more than 70% of the world's population will live in one. But how will our world cope under the strain of 3 billion more city dwellers? Together, cities already consume 80% of material and energy resources and produce 75% of all carbon emissions. Their high concentration of people and infrastructure make them vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like rising sea levels, higher temperatures, and storm damage. And in the developing world, many cities are growing faster than the infrastructure that is needed to support them. Sustainability is the key, and cities are striving for it. Where cities are sustainable, they are more competitive, more attractive to people and investment, more able to lift their citizens out of poverty and provide them with a great place to live, work, and play. All over the world, cities, rich and vibrant in their own cultures, are shaping their own ambitious plans for their sustainable futures, but sharing common aims. To take real action on climate change. To encourage economic development to the benefit, not the detriment, of the environment. To become more resilient to disasters and a changing climate. To improve the quality of life and well-being of citizens, fostering supportive and inclusive communities in which everyone can thrive. And to take advantage of smart technologies to improve the efficiency of infrastructure and provide citizens with better, more responsive services. But how? Even the most advanced cities can't make this journey alone, and that's where business can help. All over the world, behind the drive towards a sustainable urban future, are businesses dedicated to finding and implementing the best solutions. They're leading the way when it comes to creating integrated systems of urban infrastructure, where buildings, energy, mobility, water and waste, and communications operate more efficiently and sustainably for the benefit of everyone. But, too often, their expertise is introduced too late in the planning life cycle to be of full benefit. And there can be barriers which stop valuable dialogue taking place. That's why the World Business Council for Sustainable Development established the Urban Infrastructure Initiative, or UII, an innovative model for early collaboration between cities and business. It's a simple idea. In 10 cities around the world, experts from 14 leading companies and municipal governments gathered around one table. Working together, they identified new approaches to realizing the city's visions of a sustainable future. Innovative, practical solutions emerged, producing real benefits for the cities and their sustainability programs. Could this new approach work for your town too? We think so. Everyone wins. Cities, by identifying solutions that can make their sustainability aspirations a reality. And business, by unlocking markets for new services and products essential in creating the sustainable cities of the future. To find out more, go to wbcsd.org/urban-infrastructure.aspx.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to this edition of our panel discussion that is hosted by Climata. So Climata is an ESG consultancy in Lagos State, Nigeria, and we are enabling African organizations and businesses to find sustainable alternatives to the product and services offering. And in the process, we help unlock opportunities that are beneficial to the business, the people, and the planet as well. And I am Harry Okoha. I'm the founder and general partner of Climater, and I will be your host for this session. Um, I also have with me on the panel Dr. Olawale Olaide from Nigeria. He's the president of the African Circular Economy Research and Policy Network. It's an honor to have you in this session, sir. Yeah. We also have Saleh Arman on the panel. He's a circular economy specialist and an assistant professor at the University of Scholars. It feels great to have you on this session, sir. Welcome. And we also have with us on the session Leonard Muyambo. Leonard is yes, we have with us on this session Leonard Muyambo from Zimbabwe. He's the chief executive officer and head of research at Power Africa Group. It's good to have you on the panel as well, Leonard. Welcome. And so today we'll be discussing extensively as much as we can on the role of sustainable cities in accelerating sustainable development. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the mandate that has garnered widespread interest and support from both the public and the private institutions globally, with a wide range of sectors and industries aligned behind the goals. We believe the real estate and construction industries, as well as the urban city planners, are uniquely positioned to lead the transition to a more sustainable future. Okay, before we proceed further, I would like to introduce our last panelist, Karim El Gendi. Karim is from the UK, and
hi. Thank you for introducing me. I'm sorry being late. Got delayed in transit.
It's no problem. We're glad to have you here. So Karim is a sustainable city strategist, and he's an urban sustainability consultant at DA. So good to have you here first on the panel, Karim. Okay. So proceeding further. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, like I was trying to say earlier on, it's a mandate that has garnered a lot of widespread interest and support from both the public and private institutions globally, and with a wide range of industries and sectors, aligning themselves and the business models behind the goals. We believe that the real estate and the construction industries, as well as both urban city planners, are uniquely positioned to lead the transition to a more sustainable future, right? So, given the poverty index of most African nations, as well as developing economies, the imminent impact of climate change, most of which are already inevitably locked in, the impacts are not looking too good, especially with the forecast for 2050, right? And just to provide more context here, some of the impacts include climate change will expose over 215 million people living in urban poverty in developing countries to extremely high temperatures. I mean, we're beginning to see some of that across major cities all over the world. And millions more urban poor will be exposed to other climate risks, including sea level rise and flooding and water scarcity as well. And also, rapidly expanding urban populations in Africa, Asia, and South America could, leave many millions more people, living in slum housing and informal settlements. And to top it all up, climate change could drive more migration to urban centers. And this is also a trend we're beginning to see in some cities globally. So now that's a problem, no doubt. So over to you, Karim. What can cities and industry stakeholders do to prepare for the pressure this would, exact on resources, services, and housing?
Hello, can somebody assist us? It seems everybody's quiet. What's happening?
Okay, we're looking into it. So I think the guests themselves are the one muting this. So Leonard, if you can just mic check, can you unmute and say something so we know you're available? And I think same with Dr. Lawale as well.
I can hear you. I'm here.
Perfectly. Okay. How about you, Dr. Lawale? Can you hear us? You might want to try to unmute yourself and. Okay, while you're trying to sort that out on the line, Karim, can you please, share with us what you think cities and industry stakeholders must do to prepare for the pressure that these would, exact on resources, services, and housing? Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to talk to that. Well, cities are, I don't want to repeat the often cited statistics about the share of cities in energy use or resource consumption or impact on climate change, because everyone knows that. So basically, we live in an urbanized world, and it's going to become increasingly so. So cities are where we are, basically, and they play disproportionate role in resource consumption, and also will be the most impacted by climate change. So with that in mind, I think we have to consider here is how do cities adapt to the impacts of climate change, and also how can cities play a positive role in reducing their own environmental footprint. To preface this, I would like to confirm here that cities, in my mind, are the best form of human settlement. So cities are the most efficient in terms of resource consumption, much more than any suburban form or any rural lifestyle or any development near wild or natural areas. The fact that we are concentrated in certain areas and living in close proximity to each other, to workplaces, to services, is the most efficient way to exist and to consume resources. So with that in mind, these cities, what they need to do is to capitalize on this opportunity of being the most sustainable human settlement form. And in order to do this, it has to be designed in a certain way, and if they're not designed in a certain way, then they have to be adapted to become so. And this is an opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to be lost as well. So with that in mind, there are different countries, different regions on different pathways to this. There are parts of the world that are entirely urbanized. 4 out of 5 people in North America live in cities. 3 out of 4 people in Europe live in cities. And so on the urbanization pathway, they're almost there. They're entirely urbanized. But you find other parts of the world where they're halfway, and in case of sub-Saharan Africa, it's still in the beginning of the urbanization process. Those who have already urbanized have developed certain urban models, and these, as we've just realized, need to be adjusted slightly in order to become sustainable, in order to adapt to climate change. In some parts of the world where the urbanization is still beginning, there is an opportunity there to get it right first time. So you don't have to build it with the old models and then fix it again. And there's an opportunity to leapfrog. Say, for example, in the case of leapfrogging landlines, for example, which happened in sub-Saharan Africa. They didn't have to go through landlines, just went straight into mobile phones. And that's as a result that it was an opportunity. So in my opinion here, parts of the world that are experiencing rapid urbanization, indeed, albeit from quite a low baseline, can capitalize on this and can urbanize properly if they get their act together and if they employ the best knowledge that is available right now. And in my mind, that urbanization model has to consider both sides of the climate change story. One is the mitigation side, which I would loosely call urban sustainability, because it does include other things like resource consumption, for example, also reducing the impact on biodiversity, which are not directly climate change, but they do fall under the wider sustainability umbrella of reducing the environmental footprint. But the other side of this is the adaptation story, which I would again call loosely urban resilience, which again includes other non-climate resilience things like resilience to pandemics, say, for example, or resilience to extreme non-climate related events like earthquakes. So with that in mind, the cities have to take these two things in mind. They have to consider urban sustainability and they have to consider urban resilience. And in order to do this, there's plenty to be done. There's all sorts of things that can be done, and there's this. This could be a subject of another conversation that I'm happy to talk to as well.
Interesting. Thank you for the insights there, Karim. So over to you, Dr. Olawale. I mean, how can governments, I mean, that's including local, state, and national governments, plan to prepare for the pressure on services and housing? And what policies are available in development to aid this transition? Over to you, Dr. Olawale. Can you hear us? I think you might want to try to unmute yourself. Yes, try to unmute yourself so we can hear what you're saying. Okay, I think would have to, while we allow Dr. Lawley some time to sort the microphone issues. I think so. Saleh, this question is for you. When sustainable development is ingrained and observed at the individual level, it becomes more effective. And so, what tips on circular economic practice can be observed at the individual level in order to ensure sustainable city development? What you say?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Henry, for giving me the opportunity to say something about circular economy practices. So basically, I conduct research on how individual level contribution can ensure sustainable development through circular economy. And in doing so, I conducted research on social media behavior of people in order to promote reusing pattern or reusing behavior at the consumption level. So actually the thing is that like the most of the circular economy research so far have been focused on the production process, like the like reducing materials, reducing virgin materials, or the recycling things. But also consumer have a very good uh, perspective in assuring circular economy in any aspect of the world. So I conducted the research on these aspects, and in terms of our today's discussion, in order to assure a sustainable city, that is SDG 11, we also prefer SDG 12 as well, that is responsible consumption and production, because SDG 12 also focuses on if the customers and consumers are responsible towards their consumption pattern, then it actually ensures a sustainable city in the long run, because it actually reduces the waste to some extent. And if consumer reduce their waste and in the consumption level, then definitely it drastically reduce the waste volume in the city. So city can enjoy a more sustainable way of doing things. So consumption level for is very important to ensure sustainable city. In addition to the architectures, engineers, and other professionals as well, but also the general people like me and others, they also have a very good perspective in assuring a sustainable city through assuring good sustainable consumption and production behavior. And in doing so, social media plays a very good role in this aspect, because social media is nowadays are very strong and influential tools of technology that people are doing are using nowadays. So if you use social media to ensure the sustainable city movement, so it has a very good positive impact in the overall movement. So from the all stakeholders perspective, it's very important to cope up with that, and it should be our focus on a particular objective as well. So thank you. Hopefully we will discuss it in later times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saleh. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I strongly believe whatever it is we are trying to do, especially to foster a circular economy mindset. I mean, amongst communities, it's important we drive that down to the individual level so as to have more productive results. So I think let's try. Over to you, Dr. Lawale. I don't know. I'm going to ask the question again. Hopefully, your microphone can let you speak. So the question to you is, how can governments, that is including both local, state, and national governments, plan to prepare for the pressure on services and housing, and what policies are available or in development to aid this transition? Over to you. Hello, Dr. Lawley. Are you there? I think you're muted now. Can you? Should I repeat the question? Can you hear me? Okay, I think we'll come back to that question later on. And let's move ahead a little bit. So, because different cities face different climate risks, and they have varying levels of vulnerability, and as a result, adaptation strategies that work in some areas might not work in others, right? So, this is for you, Leonard. I mean, from a design perspective, how can city planners and industry stakeholders manage that complexity, that results? You're mute.
So you were saying, how can industry planner designers manage the complexity of?
Yeah, so I mean, this is speaking from a design perspective. How can you suggest that city planners and industry stakeholders, those in the real estate and construction sector industry, how can they manage the complexity of having to deal with, the adaptation strategies that could work in other climes like Europe, for example, which due to our climatic conditions here in Africa might not be suited for us here. How can they better manage that complexity?
Good question. I think we need to look inwardly. I'll reference one of the biggest examples that we faced in the 21st century, and that is a global pandemic that affected each and every country differently. So you're looking at the pandemic, what you had is that the pandemic presented a case study of what a climate change lockdown could be, whether it's natural disaster, whether it's droughts, whatever it is going to be, much of it is going to be centered around cities. And we're looking at, the stats that were presented from the beginning, 80% of global GDP is generated within cities. So when you look from a design perspective, we saw so many flaws as a result of the pandemic, whether it was mobility, housing, urban green spaces, whatever we saw was the case study as to what would go wrong and what went wrong with our design. And looking at the role of design, we realized that for us to be in a lockdown, we needed to be in livable homes, in spaces that could form a sort of belonging, inclusion, and comfort, and actually allow for servicing of amenities wherever we needed them. And much of the global south had failed in that regard because you have much of the population living in slums. So as a lab, what we focus mainly on is design. So we started looking at part of the design perspective. How do we look at affordable housing? So one of the biggest things then you want to look at is that when you're looking at the people that are affected the most, these are the people that are in the vulnerable communities, and them being affected is the case study that we then look at into actually empowering the whole population. So when you look at then our case of affordable housing, how do you build a $8,000 house for the lowest income earning population? And this then looks into you looking inwardly, as I said earlier. So traditionally, already within African states or countries, we have our own methods of construction that we have used traditionally, and those could have resulted in less adoption as people moved into the middle income. But then those traditional means were as a result of actually us being in a more sustainable regard of construction. So what we then looked at is that how do we start experimenting with local materials? And what you would find on the case of design when you start using materials mapping is that you're now actually allowing for the production of materials locally and allowing for the reduction of the carbon footprint. So instead of using quarry, now you're using maybe clay that is abundantly found in a local setting. And then what that results is that you're not only challenging the aspects of emissions within the construction sector, but you're also allowing for a mitigative measure that allows you to then design an affordable house. So from a design perspective, what you look, everything has to start with design. So for us to have the kind of cities we have, it's a design problem. Whether it's urban sprawling resulting in mobility issues such as higher emissions as to diesel engines and things like that, that's a design related problem. As people move out and out of the city, but they want to come back to the city as an economic hub, what you have is that it's a design flaw that would then allow us to look back and say, where did we go wrong? If we're introducing mass transit, how are we going to put electric vehicles, buses, for mass transit to actually ferry more people from one point to another? So from a design perspective, I think those were the major things that we looked at, taking COVID as a case study, because I think as much as it's a current pandemic and a problem, it has presented itself as a case study to what is wrong with our design in terms of the cities we live in. Much of the cities we live in, they're not livable at all. And what we'd have looked at is that people working from home, access to amenities, people don't have access to basic water. So you then start looking at what are the innovations in terms of design that you look at. One case study we then also looked at is that when you look at the climate story, whether it's climate change, whether it's a pandemic, it's a vulnerable community story. So sustainability looks into inclusion. So the climate change story is a story for young people. It's a story for the disabled, people with disabilities. It's a story for old people. It's a story for people who are usually outside, the looked areas. So when you look at those sectors, if you're looking at a climate change disaster, how is a person who's got a disability being able to navigate between spaces? And what we did as a lab is we started experimenting on things like housing for people with disabilities. So we're working on the first construction of a house for persons with disabilities, and that forces within the inclusive part. And this house is not only for the people with disabilities, it's a universal house that then looks into focusing, when you get old with age, you face certain forms of disability. And by addressing these design issues, you now support independent living that allows you to actually move from one place to another within your spaces. So looking into spaces design, we look at human-centered design, be the human being the one person that is affected the most. And we look at the most affected human within that category of the human-centered design. And then it goes to the environmental-centered aspect of design. What are the inputs we're going to use, infrastructure inputs? What are the least ones with the least carbon footprint? So I think design definitely plays a role. And I think it's the first sort of point of call to address challenges. And I always say to most people, whatever challenges we're facing in cities, it's a design challenge. It's not a city challenge, it's a design challenge. And once we have it with the design aspect of it, then we can have better and more sustainable cities. That's my view.
Interesting perspective, Leonard. Honestly, I mean, I like the aspect that touched on the fact that what we face, the problem we face with cities and the way they are at the moment, it's majorly arising from the design, problem. It's obviously a design problem, of course, and it makes sense to, readdress that issue. We need to go back to the way cities are being designed and structured, right? So I think we'd like to get your perspective, Dr. Lawale, right now. I'm going to so before we go over to the first questions I asked, I mean, do you have any thoughts on this very question that Leonard just answered now? Dr. Lawale, can you unmute your microphone and okay, I think I don't know what the problem is. Hello, can you hear me, Dr. Lawale? So you're on mute now. Do you have any thoughts regarding the question Leonard just answered? Okay. Saleh, this is for you. What have been some of the direct socio-environmental effects of the linear economy model in cities? I mean, from your experience, what has been some of those direct effects? I think you're mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Yeah. So hope you are listening to me now. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fine. Fine. Thank you. Yes. So you were asking about a linear economy, right? So the traditional linear economy practice actually like cradle to grave system. That is, a consumer purchases a particular product, and he or she consumes and make a waste out of it. So this is the traditional linear economy or the cradle to grave system as per circular economy expert. So what a circular economy says that the system should not be linear, rather it should promote a circular pattern. Say for example, if a consumer consumes a product, and then there must be some byproduct out of it. So proper utilization of those byproduct is essential, and in doing so, the planning is repeated. So the sustainable city design should be designed in such a way that the traditional cradle to grave system should be omitted, and the circular system should be enabled. Say for example, if a consumer purchase a shirt for wearing his day-to-day life, then after certain amount of time, he can resell it to other person at a lowest possible cost. It not only reduce the waste, but also it actually enhance or increase the product life cycle of a particular product. So in this way, circularity can be ensured. And in terms of city, if you think that our household waste, our household waste can be used as a biofuel, to run city buses. So it actually less the depending on fossil fuel, but also it increases the green energy system as well. So that's what actually the circular economy promotes, and definitely circular city is now a most desirable part in all over the world. So not only it actually in developed world, but also developing countries are approaching in designing circular cities. So as per I have seen some African cities are now planning to make their city circular. So actually, it's very good idea to make the city circular, and in this way, collaborative approach is needed. That's what I am urging to everybody, like people from all over the all corner of the world. They should work together. Like I'm from outside Africa. I'm from Bangladesh. So there should be a collaborative approach should be taken to all experts, so that not only a particular African city is circular, but also most of the part of the world should be circular. And actually, we are now in a global village, so actually we are depending on each other. So if an African city tries to develop themselves as a circular city, definitely an Asian city can follow their model as well. So like the same economic situation is there, so it could be a very good model if the African models can be shared with other developing nations, like my country, Bangladesh. So it's a really exemplary step by African city authorities to make their city circular and sustainable.
Thank you so much, Saleh, for that insight. Over to you, Karim. I don't know, did you have any thoughts regarding this question?
On circularity in general.
Yeah, so what from your experience, what have been some of the direct social environmental effects of the linear economy model in cities?
Okay. So cities are basically where this linear model happens. Cities are where materials are imported into. So cities have a footprint, and that footprint extends their own footprint, their own physical footprint. So the city's urban footprint could extend to as far as anywhere in the world where they could bring resources in. So there's this idea of urban metabolism, where cities are like creatures or natural beings consuming resources and then extracting waste. And that waste could be solid waste, could be wastewater, could be carbon emissions. And the resources could be energy, could be fresh water, and they could be materials. And the linear economy basically is what we currently have, where cities import materials and consume it internally and then discharge it out as waste beyond it. And the footprint of cities currently is incredible, much bigger than what they used to be, which is basically the hinterland surrounding the city. At the moment, the level of circularity is pretty weak globally. So we are talking 91.5% of all material use is linear. So materials, 91% or more than 91% of materials come into cities, get consumed once, and then get discharged into waste. So that model, the take, make, use, and dispose, is basically the current model of consumption. Any element of circularity, which at the moment is less than 9%, would introduce more loops into that material consumption. At the moment, the idea of circularity is quite large. So it includes water use, includes energy use, but even on the level of material consumption, it's quite low. Even on things that we have agreed that we need to recycle, like plastics, if you look at the statistics, plastics are not being recycled. It's really, really little how much plastics actually is recyclable, and it does get recycled. In fact, the percentage is quite minimal, almost meaningless. So, which is why we're now moving into no single-use plastic. Don't make it in the first place. So this is I think I've got disconnected.
Thank you so much.
Can you still
That
hear
was
me?
I can hear you. That was quite insightful. Thank you so much for that. So over to my next question. While interacting with stakeholders in the real estate and construction industry here, we often get some questions and concerns about sustainable development. And this again is for you, Karim. One of those questions we get is, oh, sustainable development. I mean, it sounds quite expensive. Respectfully speaking, can you help us demystify this perception, please?
I don't understand why people think it's expensive, to be honest. It is not business as usual. And people are always worried about what is not business as usual. So if the business next door hasn't done it, so we don't know how to do it. So we have fears as to what it could do. But from a theoretical point of view, at the moment, we are in an unfair situation. We are not paying for the damage we're making. No one is paying for the damage we're making. At the moment, the global commons, the forests, the atmosphere, the oceans, no one owns these things, and these are the things that we're damaging, and no one is paying for that. So businesses get away with polluting, so to speak, without paying for this. And the product, as a result, the cost of the product does not reflect the actual cost to these global commons. So the idea that if we do it more sustainably, then we're paying more, well, at the moment, we're not paying the right price. And the ones that are paying the right price are the people who are most impacted by climate change. So Bangladesh is paying disproportionate share of the cheap goods that you and I buy because they're going to get sea level rise and they're going to get impacted as a result. The Nile Delta will pay for this as a result. People who get increased flooding will pay more as a result of that cheap good that you're buying. So that when we say put the price right, we're only saying that these things are not externalities to the cost of the products. They are quite important if we are paying the fair cost of something. But coming back to your question, I just needed to preface that because I feel sometimes that we lose perspective as to yes. So if we come back to the original question, yes, in the current business atmosphere of development, urban development, there is a process of market transformation taking place, and that has started different countries in a different stage of development. Where how do we change the business as usual, regardless of how fair or unfair it is, into a more sustainable model? And as the businesses started picking up on this, it has become mainstream. It has become almost commodified, and it has become a product that can be done at a fairly standard way, and almost does not require a significant additional cost. And people now figured out how to do it. The industry now produces the right equipment for it, the right specifications for it. So it has become, in certain contexts, it has become mainstream. Many of the regulations have helped this, and also some of the third-party certification systems have supported this. So they're basically considered market transformation tools because they encourage those who do well and discourage those who don't, but without actually any stick. It's just carrots. And as a result, those who are still at the earlier stages of this transformation, say in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where this transformation has not started to the same extent, have to understand that this is just the earlier stages of the same market transformation. And those who capitalized on it earlier on are likely to reap the rewards earlier on because they can see it coming anyways. So there are other things than the 5% that you might potentially pay on the cost that you could benefit as a result. There's goodwill, there's great marketing opportunities, there's demonstrating social responsibility to the local community, and all of these things are the quick wins that you're going to get out of this for this additional 5%. So later on, there will be no additional costs. But for the pioneers of transformation in a new country where these practices, this market transformation is yet to happen, there are benefits to compensate for this additional thing. Yes, being a pioneer always comes with risks, but the risks can be mitigated by the fact that you've seen precedent in other countries where this has happened successfully, and the transformation is now almost fully complete. So that would be my take on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that
I'm
was
sorry,
quite
sorry, Saleh, about
and
the
this brings me to
Bangladesh
my next.
comment.
No, that's not normal. As far as what I know,
I think
I am actually every day we're suffering a lot due to this, and you know that that's like it's a global impact. That's what I'm saying, and due to the unsustainable practices of the traditional economic practice, and not only that, just a bad outcome of capitalist society. Where the people just only looking for the cheap labor things, and the labor cost is comparatively cheaper in Bangladesh. So that's why the global giants are coming here to outsource their production facilities. So it actually hampers our environment a lot. And also, we those of us who are concerning about our environment, so we are protesting those things, but it's of no use, unfortunately. So let's see what
yeah.
happens in coming future.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that chip in, Saleh. And yes, I think Karim, your reference to Bangladesh was actually in context, actually. So I think this one is for you, Leonard. Another of the question we get is, how do I justify the returns on investment? And one framework we use to do justice to that is the ROSI framework, the Return on Sustainable Investment framework, developed by the New York University Center for Business Sustainable Business Development, which I'm sure you are familiar with as well. So, based on your experience with the framework, how has return on investment been justified across the various factors in the framework, particularly when non-traditional factors such as environmental and social sustainability are considered in construction projects? Over to you, Leonard.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's a really good development, the ROSI, that the NYU strain came up with, and it's actually helping us trying to justify a lot of factors. But before I start with that, that was a really good question, and I think one of the most things we have to understand about sustainability is that it's not only sustainable on the environment. Sustainability has to look into everything: the economic sustainability of any project, the environmental sustainability, the human-centered approach to design, which it should be sustainable. So when you're looking at the economic sustainability of any project, that's where we look at the bankability of a project, looking at the basic returns without them being sustainable returns. And I think what we have on the market is the perceived risk of sustainability. So people then usually group what you call sustainable projects under corporate social responsibility. So what you have is that when any person suggests a project within a firm that is sustainable, it's seen as a goodwill project. We're doing good for the environment. Let's just put it as a greenwashing project, that we have done this project. And people fail to understand that there are financial returns that could be recouped from that. So in terms of financial returns, they could be starting from your basic book valuations, like looking at the basic accounting. You're looking at case studies that look into manufacturing. And then one of them, I'll use a local case study here in Zimbabwe called Distributed Power Africa. So Distributed Power Africa, like any other solar company or renewable company out there in the world, comes to your company, then tells you, we want to put up a solar plant on your building and offset your energy by you using our grid and paying your bills as you would pay to a local regulator. So what you'll find now is that someone had to de-risk the project, and that is the project founder, the people who came up with the solar energy project. Because for traditional businesses to adopt the solar projects on themselves, they're looking at the cost of procuring the solar panels, the cost of procuring materials, or the feasibility studies, which become probably at least expensive on their balance sheet. But then when you're looking at external investors now looking and say, we can come in and take off that burden from your balance sheet, but then you pay the returns as you go. So you're paying them as a normal bill. And then what you then find, most of these companies then experience a better return on that. So in looking at these projects, you're looking at who is going to adopt the project. That's number one key. Who's got the capital to adopt the project, and what kind of returns are they looking at? So if you're looking at the solar company, these are companies you are looking at IPPs, independent power producers. And in a country like Zimbabwe, where you have a good sort of like framework that's happening within the independent power producing company, you now have entrepreneurs starting businesses such as DPA to provide renewable energy to, the existing companies that usually consume a lot of energy. So in most ways, the returns on sustainability have to be viewed from the investor perspective. And that's why you look at a lot of startups companies coming up. And what we need to understand in most businesses is that when introducing sustainable businesses and trying to make a financial case for them, you need to look into the business itself. So traditionally, a supermarket is not in the business of making packaging. So a supermarket will sell anything that comes in any form of packaging, that is plastic or anything. They are not in the business of reintroducing any other form of packaging. But looking into the value chain as to who supplies that packaging, it's what then makes sense for them. So if I'm getting a cent per plastic, who is going to give me a cheaper product? And this is where sort of like innovations come in, because these people are being traditional because they're incumbents and they look at the core business. And what we fail to understand, those who are in the sustainability sector, is that we actually come in and try to do a copy-paste mechanism, and failing to understand in these capital societies, these businesses exist to make a profit, right? And their bottom line is looking at where are the biggest, whatever makes financial sense to them, they will adopt it. And what we need to do is then look into the value chain of what these things are, what these people are producing. So I'll give you another example of what we're working on. We have a developer who wants to get into affordable housing. But again, traditionally, affordable housing is viewed as, for the low income and they cannot afford it. And what you then have is that the risk factor, it's the perceived risk. It's never the actual risk, because these actually make financial sense. When we're doing a study on how we can provide housing that is at mainly basic $8,000, we came across a case study that was introduced, I think it's in Bangladesh, by this professor called Yunus. And what he did, he tried to introduce lending to the low income areas. So how do I produce a microfinancing framework to people who actually don't have collateral? So what he then did, he started using cooperative, where you get 7 people within the cooperative. And those 7 people, you are lent based upon the other person returning the money that they had borrowed. So it's a trust collateral. So you start using trust, you bank on the trust. So within this cooperative, the 7 people have to trust themselves that the other is going to return so that my turn comes on. So you find that in their model, no one defaulted. They had close to minimal defaulting rates within the lending program. So much of it has to go into innovating. And that's why you get Rossi introducing the returns on sustainable investments, because there is much perceived risk in the framework where people think if you're talking about sustainability, we're talking about corporate social responsibility. We're talking about ESG reports where we have to publish, metrics of, we've done good in this regard. But when we actually look at the core of it, we're trying to make a case in saying there is actually a financial case to this thing where your mandate to your shareholders can actually make good sense. Because what this CEO is looking at is that at the end of every annual general meeting, my shareholder is going to look at my balance sheet. Ask the affected communities are the ones who are looking at the ESG matrices. So, I mean, at the core of it, the most important thing is looking into the company operations as themselves. Okay, if this company is, for example, a construction company, they use trucks to supply, within their supply chains, and they use diesel trucks. You come, as innovators, and that's why for me, the people who are only going to bridge that gap are innovators. Karim earlier talked about the leapfrogging element of from landline to mobile telephony, and what you get in countries such as the sub-Saharan region. The biggest thing that happened was that leapfrogging actually allowed for a big economic boom and allowed for unlocking of a lot of economic value. But in a traditional sense, where people believe that the incumbents, which were the local regulators and these traditional companies, believe that landlines were going to be in existence forever, and they never sort of like understood how Africa could become one of the biggest adopters of mobile telephony. And right now, Zimbabwe is looking at 100% mobile penetration rate. It's everyone, almost everyone has got a mobile phone. And now this innovation is actually transpired to actually allow a lot of innovations. That's, you're looking into mobile financial systems, you're looking into trading, insurance, and things like that. So we're not looking at the incumbent to innovate. We're looking at the startups that are going to close in the gap. And these are the people that see the financial returns, because they're coming in with a fresh mind to say, for me to actually reduce my costs, let me actually give people within this value chain a reusable bag that they can come and redeem points and become loyal customers within my company. So when you start then looking at those instruments, these people are now looking at innovative financing. So in the clear sense of it, it's mostly the innovator that's going to use to understand the return on the investment, on the sustainable investment. And that's why you get, in the next 20 years, much of the business you're looking into the European markets, the North American markets. Consumerism is being driven by, conscious millennials who are now looking into sustainable businesses. If you are going to supply me an automobile, is it an electric car? What is it? And then that's what's going to be pushed by these companies that then adopt sort of like these innovative means of trying to be sustainable. So much of the task then stands with the business development of these companies, integrating with the chartered financial analyst of these companies, because much of it, you see, they work in isolation. Business development introduces a product, the financial guys try to make a case out of it in absence of the developers themselves. But an integration with the company that tries to answer sustainability in forms of whether it's pricing, whether it's efficiency, whether it's climate change, it brings everything into perspective. Because the challenge now we're facing is within companies is the silo relationship. People working in silos, where the developer of a product works in silo of the financial understanding of the product, and then the product never makes it to market, or it's expensive to take to market, when in actual sense sustainability is cheaper. So we're looking at a few decades ago, getting a solar panel was expensive, but now solar panels are close to the cheapest form of energy on the market, and they are the ones that are closing the energy gap within the global south. So making of these financial cases is much going to be pushed by startups. It's going to be, because startups are now reinventing the wheel. And the disruptive theory, we know it, that the way it transcends is then the incumbent is just there to make a profit, but the startup is saying, I want to make an impact and make a profit. And then they bring those two things together, and they use a system like Rossi. And that's what we do in our company. Someone comes to me and is like, okay, I want to make a $15,000 house that traditionally costs $50,000. We reverse engineer, we look at material study, and then we make it sustainable. We make a profit. The client gets a house. At the same time, you actually build a portfolio that supports the ESG metric. So in working with Rossi, there's a lot that goes into play, and it starts from product development for you to then have the final financial return that you would want to have. But a copy paste on an existing layer is quite difficult, because you're copying and pasting to a product that traditionally doesn't speak to sustainability. And that's why you find these companies being frustrated to say, oh, there are no returns here, because they are not innovating. They are actually trying to use the existing model to try and paste into a sustainable model. So this Rossi, what we've seen, works in product development, where you're actually reinventing the wheel, and where the copying paste becomes more comprehensive and difficult, because you have to pump in a lot of money to paste your oil company to make it as if, now you want to build a carbon capture system. That's going to cost you a lot, because you want to still mine oil, right? So it's going to be a lot more that you're going to spend. But of course, just to close up that, I think at the end of the day, we now look at the market and what's being introduced onto the market. One of the most important things is things like environmental credits. So with companies then getting environmental credits, I know the North American side, they actually trade the credits. Where Tesla, last year, Tesla made almost 90% of its profit by selling its environmental credits that they were issued by the government. So you're looking at a company that said we made 495 million, close to $500 million in profit, but 90% of that was from environmental credits. So much of this innovation then comes to how we describe capital and financing and returns, because a company could transfer its returns on environmental credit into financial returns. So those are things that also you then look at local markets. How do we adopt such systems where companies that are actually being sustainable get awarded those credits that they can trade on the market to offset other companies' carbon emissions, and as a result, they make more money and more profit. And then that becomes a more lucrative investment for most companies. Now you're seeing if Ford having to buy credits from Tesla is now actually making a fleet of what? Of electric vehicles, because they don't want to keep on buying credits to offset their emissions. So you now see the adoption of EVs along the value chain becomes higher because of this de-risked platform that Tesla did. But when Tesla came onto the market, people were saying they're crazy, right? So I think in much of the innovation and ROSI and looking in this financing instrument, you're looking at the capital as well. The capital is always going to become sort of like attractive towards the people who are going to make an impact. So the forms of traditional capital are changing. Investment banking is changing, where you're looking at, DFIs, institutional investors are taking sort of like the forefront of unlocking capital within the sustainable space. So when you are going to then be asked for, you're going to ask for an investment on the market, the new normal is looking at your ESG metrics. What's your impact? And that's becoming more bankable. So from an investment perspective where you can attract different forms of capital, it's actually the capital actually changing also the narrative on the returns. And, people, what I like about business always answers the capital. So the more the capital becomes sustainable, the more people actually adopt sustainable means. And that's what you also see in the construction sector. 3D printers being introduced. Zimbabwe is printing its first houses this quarter. And these things happening to work towards sustainability, and people are seeing that it's more bankable and the more returns then become. So as we look at more case studies, it makes more sense for people to understand maybe ROSI, to make more informed decision on investments. But it's unfortunate as they wait, it's the startup, the innovator that actually taking ground is being the market leader.
Very insightful contribution there, Leonard. Honestly, I believe there's a lot of opportunity, especially for sub-Saharan African regions that are looking to infuse sustainability into developmental projects, especially when exploring the carbon credit side of things. That could be a discussion for another day. Yeah, but again, I think it's quite true. We see more adoption from startups, young startups that are starting out. They're kind of looking for like a blue ocean strategy to help them, differentiate in the market, and sustainability really offers that, advantage, especially when viewed from the ESG perspective. So it's something quite promising, and thank you for that. So I think I have to circle back to Dr. Lawale right now. Just before I go ahead, Dr. Lawale, can you try to test your microphone to see if you can, if it's working now? Can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Lawale, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Henry, I can hear you now. I apologize for the technical issues.
Wow. So good to hear your voice. It's very good to have you back.
Yeah.
So we've gone ahead, but I'm going to start from the first question I asked, because this is very much important. Looking at the dynamics of climate change and the way it's impacting cities and humans as well. One key thing we would like to hear from you is how can governments, both local, state, and national governments, how can they plan to prepare for the pressure that the impact of climate change will exert on services and housing, and what policies are available or in development to aid, this transition?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry, for having me. Let me take the perspective from, because we're talking about Africa. Maybe I can give some examples and some countries. Everybody knows now that climate change is real and is here with us, at least for the impacts of climate change vis-a-vis recurring disasters in terms of intensity of the occurrence of these natural disasters, we may call them, in terms of flooding, wildfires, to to give a few examples. The way to go in terms of policy and responding to these challenges, I will call them, is to have appropriate policies in place. For instance, if you know that your country or part of your country or in the cities like Lagos is prone to seasonal flooding, you need to have some form of early warning for people to know that, okay, in the next few weeks you are going to have a deluge of rains, and the banks will overflow and you will have flooding incidences. So what would be your response? Your response would be perhaps to relocate the people that are close to those areas. Another thing is to also be proactive, to have some drainage channels, some uh, desetting of the rivers, and dredging of waterways. So those are the responses that we have. But beyond that, the need for policy framework that will enhance implementation. Sometimes the government and government officials just come to tell people this is what they should do, but there are no agencies, appropriate uh, arms of government to implement these issues. So, in a nutshell, I would say that yes, climate change is real, and the impacts are more in the cities and mega cities like Lagos, Ibadan, Kano, to give an example of Nigeria. And now we're getting signals that there may be a lot of flooding from September, but there are no good work on the ground. Businesses can also help, because my colleagues have been talking about businesses. We know that people consume some materials and they throw away, and these materials end up in the streams, blocking the drainages. So these businesses, there are no sanctions, as some of my colleagues have alluded. Who pays for this? There's a policy of producer responsibilities and producer polluters pays, but those some of these things are in documents, but nobody is actually uh, putting some people to responsibility. So these are the things that should be done. And then maybe now with the realities, maybe in the past they are not so needed, but now we are seeing the need more and more, and it is the responsibility of government and all stakeholders. And when I mean stakeholders, I mean non-state actors too, telling the people what they ought to do. We all want to live a good life, and livability in the city is more important than even in the villages. There are ambience of the environment that are created. So we don't really have much of this crisis as we have in the cities. But because of the nature of cities, congestion, concentration, there's need for proper planning. Most of our cities are not well planned. So it's all has to do with design and policy and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was quite insightful. And honestly, I think one major problem we're having when it comes to policy happens to be, enforcement. So I think that's where we need to see more actions and more support, right? So again, just again to you, Dr. Lawale. I mean, can you briefly explain some of the challenges that are prevalent, in implementing sustainable policies?
Yes, let me bring the context of Africa again and give you examples of some cities, countries. The major challenge I say is that people uh, are used to the way of life. Okay, there's actually always a resistance to change, even when they don't know whether that change will bring about a better life. So they're just averse to change. And that is normal for human beings. It's so difficult to change attitude of people. And especially when you are moving from the trajectory of what you are not used to doing, to say this is the better way to do things. So people initially want to resist. And there's also this uh, concept of adoption. Okay, we always have innovators, early adopters, majority, late adopters, and laggards. So the same way in terms of policy and encouraging policies in countries or in government. And government are so, because they want what is popular, okay, with the vote, especially in a democracy. It is difficult to quickly make a shift to sustainable ways. But when the sustainable development goals and nations are having voluntary reporting, it is possible to learn from best practice and for people to change. So one thing I say a challenge is policy, ability to affect a policy change. And the other thing is, I also said earlier, is the culture of people. They always want to stay in their comfort zone. Some of my colleagues have alluded to the example of mobile phones and the electric cars. Uh, in last 20 years, 20 years ago, it would have been difficult to think that everybody, there will be telephone coverage of up to 80% in a particular country in Africa. So might be unthinkable. Also thinking of electric cars and what people, the attitude of people towards electric car. But now everybody wants to have. I mean, if you have an electric car in Africa, you want to show it. So it's important that uh, policy, culture of people, and ability to educate people will be important. Notwithstanding corruption, because I mentioned earlier that who is holding people responsible for their negative impact on the environment. Companies, let me give an example of companies, they give a lot of profits maybe after or before tax every year, but no, most people are attracted to the policy. But it may be instructive to know that what expense are they making those profits? How many people have died as a result of their pollution? How many people have died at a lot of accidents they have caused on our highway? How many people will die in the future as a result of policy? So if you put a profit vis-a-vis environmental damages or negative impact, it might even be better not to declare any profit because our lives are important. Not just you need people to be alive to enjoy the profit that you are declaring at the end of the day. So profit is not everything. That's what I want to say. If I have to speak to companies, I need to also look at the environment. I mean, sustainability report. How are they impacting the environment? What improvement are they having on the society? In terms of employment, how many people are they employing? In terms of casualization, are they having permanent staff or casual staff? What is the environment? What's the environmental impact of the activities on society? So these issues are the challenges: corruption, the culture of people, the inadequate policy. I want to mention those, emphasize those key areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, again, over and over again, as you are narrating your perspective, it all boils down to one thing: people, people, people. People are the ones perpetuating these, problems we see both from the environmental side and the likes. And then people are also the ones that are expected to drive the change we seek for in a sustainable society. And so, yeah, it's largely a people problem, and this is something we need to, with a concerted effort from across all stakeholders to, contribute to, make to justice to. So this leads me to my next question to you, Saleh. I mean, despite the fact that sustainability is a global trend, one of the most significant observations we've made while working with the stakeholders is the extent of the knowledge gap across sectors. I mean, it's quite large, and even down to the individual level, especially here in Africa, right, where sustainability discussion is still trying to gain some level of momentum, right? So, from your experience, how do you think, or what do you think, how can circular economy thinking be promoted in the client's community?
Okay, thank you. So what you used to say is that there's some the knowledge gap, right? So yes, so knowledge gap is there because general people have very limited idea about sustainable development, and also the circular system and the sustainable city, everything. Like, say for example, like when I conducted my study on the reusing behavior of people in order to assess circular economy. So I face that people have a very limited idea about circular economy, and most of them, they don't they hear circular economy for the first time in their life. So this is a very big gap in terms of knowledge. So there is uh, that's what I feel, that social media play a very good role to lower the knowledge gap, because social media creates a vibe among large audience, and you can use this vibe into limitless, borderless, and nationlessly, and you can engage more people in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of race or nationality, everything. So knowledge gap should be reduced, and social media could play a vital role in this perspective. So if we reduce this knowledge gap of the stakeholders of sustainable development, then we can ensure that we would get a better sustainable future in coming days. That's what I believe. And at the same time, like the people should try it from the individual level. Because that's what I said before, that the responsible consumption is important. Because as from the speech of Karim said that plastic is very difficult to recycling. So in terms of using plastic things, we should reduce the usage of plastic, because as it is very difficult to recycle plastic things. And even if you recycle plastics, it still emits carbon and other things, and you also degrade the environment as well. So instead of focusing on recycling things, we should reduce the usage from the consumer level. And that's what I can say. And another thing from our speech from the Leonard is that the individual product should be innovated in such a way so that it could prefer the circularity. Like we are using cell phone, but if we face any difficulties while using our cell phone and go to the service center, they don't replace our product. Why? Because they don't have such parts at this moment. And it also creates e-waste at a large extent, because if I can't replace the particular parts, then I have to throw out the cell phone. It also it creates a e-waste to a large extent. So the product innovation should be focused on circular economy perspective. Otherwise, the waste will be accelerating day by day, and it would be very hard for us to ensure sustainable city in at large. So that's what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of work to be done. It's a gradual step, at least. Leveraging off of the success, that is to some extent achieved in other developing countries that are already playing big on sustainability. I mean, I think Africa would catch up. As long as we have more people bringing in new perspective into how we can sustainably, develop our cities as well. So let's touch a little bit on the financial aspect. So financial institutions are one of the sectors that are driving the sustainability trend globally. And major financial institutions such as BlackRock, IFC, BNP Paribas, and others have been at the forefront of the sustainable finance trend. which, as Leonard mentioned, driving sustainability from the financial point of view will really help make sustainability a mainstream trend as well. So we are seeing the same thing with some of our local lending institutions, even here in Nigeria. And so over to you, Leonard. From your experience, how far has the investment community gone to support sustainable construction and the built environment in Africa? And what can be done to improve their participation in the value chain? Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
I think you're on mute now. Okay.
Hey, Henry, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, great, perfect. So you're talking about, my network had dropped a bit. You're talking about the role of financial institution in driving the sustainability dialogue. Can you just come up again? Because I lost you on that part.
Okay, so I was narrating from your experience so far. How has the investment community, gone to support sustainable construction and the built environment in Africa? And what can be done to improve their participation more, in the value chain?
Yeah, so perfect. So I'll look at mostly, obviously, I'm going to explain Zimbabwe and the sub-Saharan region and mostly other parts that I'm aware of, but mostly my experience is within the SADC region. And as we are trying to expand, we also see opportunities out there. So I'll start, for example, with Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe in the built environment has done really great work. So one of the instruments that you can get from institutional investors, that is from the housing side or any other project, what you get is prescribed assets. So with prescribed assets is that 7% of most pension fund investments should be directed through prescribed assets. So for example, if I'm doing a housing project of 300 affordable housing units for the low income areas, that investment can be a prescribed asset that then can access funding from the pension funds for development of such a project. So what you find is that development in terms of those built environment, there is a lot of funding. And I think it's an unusual statement to say that there's a lot of funding within the sustainable sector within Africa, because you look at African leaders, most of them are doing a lot in unlocking this financing from whether it's DFI. One of our projects worked on locally was with a local DFI called the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe, which recently got accredited with the Green Climate Fund and as an accredited partner. So what you get is that our project with them was on building housing for persons with disabilities, where we unlocked value of much like $100,000. So traditionally, that's why I said much of it is perceived risk. Within the built environment, what you find is that they are off-takers of sustainable projects as long as they make bankable sense. The problem now is people who throw sustainable projects without having made the financial sense to institutional investors. Because what you have to understand is when it comes to IIs, like pension funds, they have an obligation towards their contributors. So they want to look at assets that can allow them to invest in and have a return so that they can pay off their pensioners when they need the money. So with those, with that 7%, so let's say it's $1 billion portfolio, we're looking at 7% of that portfolio. That 7%, we have to also be imaginative as construction companies, as labs, as designers, to design towards that funding. Because what you want to do, we understand how to make a project sustainable, but we don't understand how to access that funding. Because all I've seen locally is that we can actually make projects that are very sustainable and access funding within the built environment, but we are working with one leaving the other, and that is a problem. So
True.
There are a lot of instruments on the local space, and you're looking at especially the DFI sector. In South Africa, you have DBSA, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which looks at the SADC region for funding. And you have instruments such as the project preparation funds that have been introduced by different DFI and on the international market. Because one thing that you have to know as well is that usually, not maybe, in the off-taking of a sustainable project requires a lot of capital in terms of the feasibility study. So what then happens on the market is that you need maybe $10 million to create a sustainable project that is going to be bankable over the period of 10 years. So to de-risk that, a lot of DFIs offer these project preparation funds. So what you have, much of it is like you can access maybe locally, you could access close to $10 million for a project preparation, as long as the project made bankable sense in the long term. So if it's a greenfield project, have you gone through the design, the feasibility for you to then access the initial preparation? Maybe it's an EIA, environmental impact assessment that you want to do, or everything like that. So the problem now is, and that's why for me and our company, what we then do is that, especially in the built environment, we look at the whole value chain. When you are promoting a project, we look at the basic aspect of which type of funding do we need at this stage to unlock the second stage of funding. And as you move a project within the construction space with that way of thinking, you then realize you can unlock a lot of funding within the value chain without even telling an investor that it's a sustainable project. You just show him the numbers. So within the space of one of the key things I'm excited about locally is the prescribed assets, which I mentioned earlier. You have access to those instruments, and then you can create a partnership which can then bridge the funding gap. So you have other partners that are willing to invest within those projects. So if it's housing, what potential partner do you have? You have your CEDA, you have your real partners that can come in and close the funding gap of a project, because they have sort of like patient capital, because maybe the project requires patient capital. So the most important thing that I've found interesting within the context of Africa and project is that people don't understand what type of funding they need. So you go to the market, you have a project, it's a good project, it's an impact project, but you can't make sense of what type of funding you need. So you go to a commercial bank, commercial bank has an obligation to depositors, that they will keep their money for whenever they need it. So they're very high up there on the risk factor. They're not going to invest in a project that's going to have a maybe 10-year return on investment ROI. They're going to have to look at the things that give them returns faster. So as you look into those projects, in most of sustainable projects, they are long-term projects. So they look into sovereign wealth funds. They look into pension funds. They look into other type of funds, maybe investment funds that look into impact investment. So understanding what type of investment we need is very important. I'm not a big fan of aid. I do realize that aid is not sustainable in its own regard. It needs to be supplemented by returns, and that's my biggest belief. And that's what has stifled African development, because much of the people who access the aid then go on not to actually implement the project. And guess what? The next person who can offtake that project is a person that wants returns. And if they look at your book and they discover that you received $100,000 investment worth of grants and you have nothing to show for it, that's a risk there. I cannot invest further funds into it. So capital becomes shy of such investments and it runs away. And what you now realize is that is the local type of profiling of investment that we need to change, not the capital, because capital is always going to move where there are returns. It's only going to be introduced to where it knows that it's going to breed more. And with our work for the past 5 years, we've learned that it's not a problem with accessing the money, it's a problem with profiling the projects and actually implementing those projects that has been stifling investment. And as long as the projects are there and they make financial sense, like I told you, locally here, we have a lot of people coming up with independent power producers. These mini grids that are coming up and people actually making money out of these IPPs, whether it's hydro in the Manicaland area where I come from. We have different companies actually producing hydro energy in these mini plants. And you look at the investment sector platform of it, is that the local policy framework has de-risked that platform so that anyone can independently produce power. So it comes to a point where the implementation has to be key and the technical capacity. And with a good technical capacity, with a good project and a good profile of that project, I then discover that you can then unlock what type of investment that you want. And then you can then talk about impact when the project is profiled correctly. So a lot of the space, and it's identifying. And I think this goes out to a lot of startups out there. If they are listening on the platform, whether you're in construction, whatever you're doing that has to do with impact investment, you have to identify who your funders are and make a case for that funding. Because, like I said earlier, commercial banks are not for, they are looking at high risk and high return. So they're not looking at high risk projects. They're looking at, at least low risk in terms of them actually investing in those things. So understanding, and there's a little bit of education that's needed for people to then understand.
Absolutely. I like the way you keep, referencing the startup ecosystem. I think a lot of the results we intend to see would be driven majorly by startups. I strongly believe that, and also there's an opportunity for incubates players as well to key into the advantages of sustainable development. So I think Leonard will be taking his leave now. Thank you so much for your insights, and we hope to do this some other time. And yeah, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you for having me, Henry. This has been a pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye. So over to you, Karim. I would like to touch on still on the funding aspect. I mean, how can we mobilize catalytic funding for sustainable cities, for emerging economies especially?
Well, funding is not my strongest point, so I don't think I should speak to this. But I think what the primary challenge that we face with cities is their lack of credit worthiness. And as a result, their ability to draw on funding is quite hampered. And so our preference tends to be local solutions for cities, and that would require small-scale urban development rather than national infrastructure projects. But national infrastructure projects are piggyback on the fact that countries have their own credit worthiness, and it's much easier for them to obtain credit, while cities don't have the same capability and the same lines of credit that are available to them. And as a result, they're left to fend for themselves in terms of obtaining funding, and that often comes in with strings, regardless of where it comes from. So that's my take. But in terms of any innovative funding mechanisms, I'm afraid I'm not an expert on that, so I can't comment.
Thank you so much. Regardless, yeah, I think Leonard really hinted a lot on that, on the funding aspect. So I think over to you, Dr. Lawale. What ways are you contributing to the advancement of sustainable development with the great initiative you're pushing with your organization, and how can your organization help drive circularity in the real estate and construction industries moving forward? Dr. Lawale, are you there? Okay, I think so. While we wait for him to come back on, I think the last question I have for you, Karim, is considering the discussion around biodiversity preservation, and which is not currently prioritized in most construction projects, at least not to the extent that is expected. What can you tell industry stakeholders about the need to preserve interaction with biodiversity and land use for urbanization purposes, and given the expected growth in urbanization and the need to further create cities to accommodate this growth?
Sorry, ecological conservation, you mean?
What?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the words. Was it biodiversity and ecological conservation?
Yeah. Biodiversity conservation.
Sure. So we're increasingly finding out the role that nature could play in cities. Previously, cities were one thing and nature was outside of it. But now we are realizing that cities nature at least plays a major role, and that the biodiversity provides services, natural services to us. And these are known as ecosystem services, and also ecosystem functions are critical to the wider functioning of the city. For example, we're increasingly realizing that natural green spaces, public open spaces that are green, provide multiple benefits to us, not just because they can provide improve their quality or provide social and psychological benefits, well, they can also play a role in terms of stormwater management. We've realized that the urban models don't... Oh, there's a fire alarm where I am, and I suspect if it comes off again, I'll have to leave because there's a fire alarm. So we've realized that these green spaces, they also play another role in terms of stormwater management. The urban models,
Hello,
which
Karim.
are quite...
I think we lost you for a second there.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
So what we are realizing is that the urban models as they currently stand, in terms of highly impermeable surfaces, buildings, and grey infrastructure, have resulted in issues to do with stormwater management and increased flooding. But by bringing nature in the form of green infrastructure, we've allowed this green infrastructure, these green public spaces, to play an additional role in that perspective. We've also allowed these green spaces to become habitats for biodiversity and for all sorts of creatures, flora and fauna that would occupy them. So from that perspective, we are realizing that the more we allow nature in, the more this enables us to use what we now call nature-based solutions to improve sustainability and to improve urban resilience. And that's an increasing realization that is making its way into existing cities, as well as the design of new cities. So from that perspective, this new notion of green infrastructure has become quite a critical component in the design of new cities, as I say, and also retrofitting existing cities. And it encompasses this the notion of biodiversity and improving biodiversity. Unfortunately, beyond the green infrastructure, it is very hard for us to improve biodiversity because the nature of the built environment, which is not a good enough habitat for this. We could do minor measures such as rooftop vegetation, for example. We could dedicate some spaces for rooftop agriculture, for example, or any kinds of urban agriculture, but these remain monoculture to a certain extent. They don't provide enough biodiversity to enable flora and fauna to develop around them. But often case in green infrastructure, we are able to do this. And also I must note that within green infrastructure, there needs to be, the diversity needs to be in mind. So we cannot just create a turf and just lawn and call that biodiversity, because we have to consciously increase the diversity of the green spaces that we introduce into the cities. So that's my take on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was quite insightful, because traditionally what we see here is most stakeholders are just focused on coming out to the project without necessarily paying much attention to the natural environment as well, thereby damaging the environmental resources that are available within this region. So thank you so much for that perspective, and it's been an interesting discussion so far. So I think I have one last question for Dr. Olawale, then we'll wrap it up for today. So over to you, Dr. Olawale. What ways are you contributing to the advancement of sustainable development, with the great initiatives you're pushing with your organization, and how can your organization help, drive circularity in the real estate and construction industry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. It's been an exciting moment for the past 1.5 hours or so. I coordinate an initiative that is called Africa Circular Economy Research and Policy Network. Our primary aim of the organization is to encourage research in circular economy and also encourage implementation of policy. So we are a research and policy network to start with. We do this by education. We create awareness. We also have an annual conference that holds every May. We had the last one in May. is to bring about scholars, researchers, practitioners in the area of circular economy to think about ways of encouraging circular economy in Africa. We know Africa is about the only continent that is not so coordinated in terms of circular economy, unlike a continent, for instance, like Europe, that has a Green Day. There's no Green Day anywhere in the African continent. So we want to instigate that. We want to encourage people to have a common, we first want to have a critical mass of people thinking the same way. Then we move gradually to encouraging policy implementation. As a research network also, with our members across Africa, they do research in many areas, in terms of resources. Current collaboration is with a project that is called Christine, with some researchers in Europe, in African, European universities. In this research, we're looking at e-waste. We know that electronic waste, we're not major manufacturers of electronics, but we are major consumer of electronic waste, especially in West Africa. So we're looking at what will be the end of life of these materials. Will African continent be a dumping ground? Because it's when new inputs, new materials are introduced into the market, they find their end in Africa. So, but we don't have a policy that will encourage the manufacturers of this company to still take up these materials and reuse, or set up a company in their end users country to recycle. So we want to pioneer some of these activities that will make them to use, at least practicing some of the principles of circular economy, which include recycling, reuse, repurposing, and also encouraging businesses, because there are opportunities here. For instance, Africa, Nigeria, we have a problem of unemployment. How can we transform our economy through circular economy by creating businesses around circular economy for people? How can we get out of poverty, the poverty trap, through circular economy by encouraging and empowering people in the areas of circular economy and economy, business model around Africa. So our network, SAP, is at the forefront of doing some of these things. We know we are not the only ones, so we encourage collaboration, because we cannot do this alone. No single company, individual can do all of this alone. It's so humongous, so we need to collaborate to do this. And in doing this, we must leave no one behind. That is the goal of the sustainable development. That's the ideal of the sustainable development goals, in leaving no one behind. Both the youth, the women, and everybody must be brought on board, and we must bring about a framework that encourages easy collaboration across space and time. So that's the much we do, and we therefore also ask for people to join us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawalede. Thank you again, everyone. It's been really an insightful discussion with each and every one of us. Before we wrap it up, I would like to quickly introduce one of our latest projects, which is a white paper we are working on for the real estate and construction sector. We will be launching that this August, and this is to all the participants on this session, especially those playing in these industries. We'll be coming up with something to help explain better and assess the ESG material risks and the opportunities that are inherent in the sector, and also share how we can possibly navigate our way out in the whole for companies, basically, right? So again, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I really truly appreciate, and thank you, Karim, for making our time to speak with us, to share insights with us. I mean, I'm so happy we finally had this discussion, like we ideated earlier on. So Stella, again to you, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, my regards to your people down there, and also Dr. Olawale. Sorry, apologize for the technical difficulties you had in there, but thank God you're able to make it through. So thank you so much, everyone, and to our listeners. We hope to hold more discussions around these topics, especially across different sectors, because at Climate Hour, one of the things we're interested in doing is to drive sustainable development across different sectors. So we'll be hosting such conversations that will help us understand insights on how to drive sustainable development across sectors. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, any last thoughts from the panelists, that would be much appreciated from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just at this point just want to encourage us.
I think that's about it, everyone.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. All right. All right, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a great day. And yes, stay in touch. Bye, Karim. Bye, Salah.
Bye.
And
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Cities are our future. By the year 2050, more than 70% of the world's population will live in one. But how will our world cope under the strain of 3 billion more city dwellers? Together, cities already consume 80% of material and energy resources and produce 75% of all carbon emissions. Their high concentration of people and infrastructure make them vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like rising sea levels, higher temperatures, and storm damage. And in the developing world, many cities are growing faster than the infrastructure that is needed to support them. Sustainability is the key, and cities are striving for it. Where cities are sustainable, they are more competitive, more attractive to people and investment, more able to lift their citizens out of poverty and provide them with a great place to live, work, and play. All over the world, cities, rich and vibrant in their own cultures, are shaping their own ambitious plans for their sustainable futures, but sharing common aims. To take real action on climate change. To encourage economic development to the benefit, not the detriment, of the environment. To become more resilient to disasters and a changing climate. To improve the quality of life and well-being of citizens, fostering supportive and inclusive communities in which everyone can thrive. And to take advantage of smart technologies to improve the efficiency of infrastructure and provide citizens with better, more responsive services. But how? Even the most advanced cities can't make this journey alone, and that's where business can help. All over the world, behind the drive towards a sustainable urban future, are businesses dedicated to finding and implementing the best solutions. They're leading the way when it comes to creating integrated systems of urban infrastructure, where buildings, energy, mobility, water and waste, and communications operate more efficiently and sustainably for the benefit of everyone. But, too often, their expertise is introduced too late in the planning life cycle to be of full benefit. And there can be barriers which stop valuable dialogue taking place. That's why the World Business Council for Sustainable Development established the Urban Infrastructure Initiative, or UII, an innovative model for early collaboration between cities and business. It's a simple idea. In 10 cities around the world, experts from 14 leading companies and municipal governments gathered around one table. Working together, they identified new approaches to realizing the city's visions of a sustainable future. Innovative, practical solutions emerged, producing real benefits for the cities and their sustainability programs. Could this new approach work for your town too? We think so. Everyone wins. Cities, by identifying solutions that can make their sustainability aspirations a reality. And business, by unlocking markets for new services and products essential in creating the sustainable cities of the future. To find out more, go to wbcsd.org/urban-infrastructure.aspx.